Hi YouTube, this is Darkon633, and now we're going to take a look at comparisons between each of the figures and the other figures that they either retooled from or based on. Anyways, we'll now move on to Thunderwing first. Anyways, we're going to take a look at Thunderwing once again. Obviously, since he is a Titan Master, there isn't a whole lot going for it, but we're just going to quickly show it in his Titan Master mode, and just have a little comparison between one of the figures that were officially released by Hasbro. As of right now, this is the only figure released by Hasbro, at least in the Generation style figures, and as a comparison, as you can see, this one is actually more towards the IDW styled head, while this one is a little bit more close to his G1 design. Otherwise, there isn't a whole lot going for this Thunderwing, which unfortunately is the case since he doesn't have a body to go with it, and hopefully Hasbro will release one down the line. Anyways, we'll now take a look at the different versions of Pounce. So, now we're going to take a look between the two versions of Pounce. The two main versions include his new Generations release and his original G1 toy release. Now, unfortunately, it seems as though the older one is actually taller than the new release, and although this one's obviously more articulated, it is definitely pretty decently bigger. This is almost towards half or almost around a deluxe scale, while this one's clearly just the standard Legends. But other than that, the overall design is pretty close, and although it does have a few more areas of sicker design, in the overall aspect, it's not a whole lot different. We're just going to quickly transform these guys on screen in order to see the comparisons between the two modes. So here is the Generations release in his Puma mode. And then we're going to quickly transform the G1 release, which is pretty similar, although there's a few different areas of design. See. The arms are about the same in the overall transformation, although it does have another joint that you need to put away the wrists. So, otherwise it is pretty close in design. Here he is next to his original counterpart in their beast modes. Overall, I think the new version is a little bit better because this one looked a little bit too lanky and it just looks kind of awkward in a lot of areas. I can understand what Hasbro and Takara was going for this particular character, although it does look a little bit weird. This original release also didn't have an open mouth, but it did have a little bit of a design where it's a little bit open, so at least the head sculpt I think is a little bit better in the older release. But other than that, you're not going to get a whole lot of differences between the two releases, since I think they did a pretty good job updating the character. Now, we'll move on to Metalhawk. Now we're going to take a comparison with Metalhawk, and while I don't have the original G1 release due to how old the product is and how expensive it is due to that, we're actually going to take a look at next to Trigger Happy. Now looking at them side by side, it's clearly easy to tell that they're pretty much exactly the same sculpt, and outside of the head and paint, you're not going to get a whole lot of differences between the two characters. We're going to quickly take a look at how they look together in vehicle mode. And here's Metalhawk and Trigger Happy side by side in vehicle mode. Just looking at them side by side, outside of the paint, once again, it's exactly the same mold and design, so you're not going to get a whole lot of differences between the two. But I guess it is still nice that the mold kind of works for the character since he did turn into a jet in the first place. So now we're going to move on to the Voyager figure in the line next. Moving on to the second largest figure in the set, Tidal Wave is the same mold as Broadside as I mentioned in the video, and just looking at them side by side, once again, Hasbro didn't do a whole lot to make a difference between the two, since it's really just a shade of paint and also the overall design for the heads as well. Now, we're going to take a look at them in their vehicle modes. Now, I have to admit, between the two designs, I think this is kind of lame, only because the overall design is pretty close, and even towards the paint in a few areas. Obviously, there's a few differences of paint, since this is a red design rather than a purple design. Just look at them side by side, it's pretty much almost identical. So, they could have done a little bit more to make this look a little different, but I guess it makes sense since it is just kind of a easy repaint and retool. Sadly, this is one of those cases where when something is mediocre, it doesn't matter how well you paint it at times, it still can end up mediocre. The overall jet mode is definitely not the best mode between the two versions, and unfortunately it just doesn't seem to work very well no matter what you do with this particular design, unless you complete the mismatch the transformation and kind of make it a little bit more makeshift, causing it to be a little bit more streamlined. Unfortunately, this is just how it ended up, and I don't really like this mode in either version of the figure, so I guess we'll just leave it at the fact that at least it makes sense abroad since they did turn into a jet, but not so much for Tidal Wave. Now, we're going to move on to the final figure of the set, and that is Magnus Prime. So, here's Magnus Prime next to Power Master Optimus Prime, and just looking at them side by side, it is interesting to note because of the way that the legs are retooled, this figure is actually taller than the original release. It's also a different shade of red, and overall, otherwise, it's about the same, except for a few areas of different paint and a few other different areas that makes it a little bit more accurate towards the Ginrai design instead of the Power Master Optimus design. Now we're going to change it into the station mode before we move on to the carrier mode. Now the retool parts also makes this mode look a little bit different too, due to the chest panel being different on the Magnus Prime and Ginrai release and how the legs form. It just seems like a little bit easier to look at this mode with those in mind. From what I can tell, you can, I think, combine the two together. Let's see if it actually works. Basically what we're going to do is take these components and plug them together. So let's see if we can actually get this together. There we go. So now we actually can get it, but obviously it's not going to really connect very well because the cap pieces will get in the way. In order to get them together, you kind of need to put away the cab. So it's going to look very strange in my opinion. I never actually done this, so let's see how well this turns out. So we can plug them together. So now you got this giant fortress together. Let's see if we get this plugged in. Other sides seem to be a little bit easier to plug in for some reason. There we go. So now we got it in this weird giant collapsed fortress mode, which just looks really hilarious actually. And I think it turned out okay, I guess, but overall you're not going to get a whole lot of difference between these two modes. Here are two versions of the mold side by side. Now, I actually mentioned, I think in my review, that these two whole areas are actually newly tooled parts. Actually, it's exactly the same as the original release, and it's been a while since I looked at Power Master Optimus, so I kind of forgot about that. The major differences between the two designs is the overall paint scheme, and obviously between the two different cab areas. This one's a lot more reminiscent of the Ginrai design, and this one's just kind of like a generic kind of Optimus, which looks, I guess, more towards the Power Master Optimus design. The overall side differences isn't a whole lot different, although I think this is slightly differently placed in this one, but it's kind of hard to tell. It's mainly, I think, towards how the sticker was painted. Well, it's not paint, it's, a sticker, it's actually tapiographed. But other than that, there isn't a whole lot of difference you're going to see there outside of the different molded feet. Both versions of the design can open the containment area here. So you can place in, this one's a little harder to get into, but you can place in vehicles inside. And the inside is also where it's a little bit retooled, since you can see the chest armor is different. Once again, you can see inside. But other than that, it's really just a different shade of paint. So overall, I think this is still a very nice design, especially if you wanted to get Ginrai in general. So as a final conclusion for the set in general, I think this set is a mixed bag. There is a few things that are cool about it, like Metal Hawk, just Pounce in general, and Ginrai, but some of the others are kind of iffy, like Tidal Wave and just how they handle Thunderwing in general. But in the overall package, it's kind of hard to recommend 100% for everything in the set, since there is another way to get Ginrai in general if you wanted to get with the Takara release, or if you got it already, obviously you don't need this release. And then we also got Pounce, which most likely will be released in a 2-pack by Takara, since they've once again already announced the 2-pack with Cloud and Fastlane. So it's kind of hard to say what to say about this pack, especially since outside of Metal Hawk, there really is no other way to get a hold of both Metal Hawk and Tidal Wave, meant to say. But this is kind of a really iffy set if you don't really care for all the figures in the package. I think it's definitely better than the previous set, since that set really just contained a lot of just mostly repaints and like a couple new characters. So I don't know, it's really hard to really say if this is a really worthwhile set. It is only $100, so it's a lot cheaper to get this set if you wanted to get Ginrai and some other characters that are kind of cool to add in the set. But there are a few things holding it back which can make me feel like it's 100% recommended. So it's kind of really a preference for the characters you may or may not want, and maybe just get 1 or 2 figures or so, maybe on the secondary market for those who don't want a figure, probably selling it just to keep the rest that they wanted from this set. Anyways, I got this at BBTS, obviously, since it is an exclusive there, and if you were able to get a hold of this, I guess it's definitely worth it, but once again, it is kind of your preference of which ones you wanted. Anyways, please comment, subscribe, and check out Hero Club and Hero Taku. Also check out my Twitter at Darkon633, and don't forget to check down the other channels down below. Please check the little bell at the bottom of the screen in order to see my content go up as soon as possible, and back more Transformers reviews. But for now, I'll be seeing you later, YouTube. Bye.